All right, now that the iSQLDB interface and its implementations are in the right place, let's see how we can implement CRUD operations. So for this demo, I'm using this main page, and if you want to code along with me, download the zip file I've attached to this lecture. So on this page, we have a list view to display the list of recipes, and we also have 3 buttons to add, update, and delete a recipe. First, we want to populate our list view. So let's get the list of recipes from the database. In the constructor of main page, first we start by calling dependency service that get iSQLDB to get an implementation of this interface. Now we get that implementation and we call get connection straight away. This returns a connection object. Now this connection object is not the connection we have in plain ADU.NET, that we open a connection and we close a connection. No, it's not like that. It's kind of similar to DB context in Entity Framework. So it's the gateway to the database. It has methods for adding, updating, deleting, and getting objects from the database. Now, to work with SQLite, the first thing we need to do is to create a table for our recipes. So we call connection.createTableAsync. And in the generic parameter, we use recipe. Now, if we do not have a table called recipe in the database, this method will create that. Otherwise, nothing will happen. So we are not going to get an exception. Now, in order to use this recipe class in our SQLite database, we need to decorate it with a few attributes. Here we have 2 properties, ID and name. I want this ID to be my primary key. So I add primary key attribute here. Let's resolve the namespace using SQLite. So it's defined in SQLite namespace. I also want this property to be auto increment. Now the name of the corresponding column in the database will be ID, but if I want to override it, I can use column attribute. And here we specify the column name, like recipe ID. But it's really not necessary, and I would suggest to stick to the convention. So let's remove this. Now for the name property or the name column, I want to apply a maximum length of 255. Now the name of this table in the database will be recipe, not recipes. But if you want to override it, you can apply table attribute here and call it recipes. Again, it's really not necessary, so I'm going to remove this. So we create the table. Now we need to get all the recipes and populate our list view. So connection dot table recipe. Now here we can use link extension methods like where, order by descending, and so on. Or we can just call toList async to get all the recipes from the database. But there is a problem here. In the constructor of main page, we have 2 expensive calls, creating the table and getting the list of recipes. As a best practice, our constructors should be very lightweight. So we should never touch the file system or go in a database or access something on the network. So we should take these calls out of the constructor. But where should it go? Well, we have a method in the page that we can override. So override on appearing. This method is called when the page appears. So I'm going to grab these 2 lines here and paste them here. Now we need to promote this connection object from a local variable to a private field. So private SQLite async connection, underline connection. And then we update it here and here as well. So here we get all the recipes in the database. Because this is an async method, we need to await it and get the result here, recipes. And this means we should apply async modifier to this method as well. And we should also await the result of createTableAsync method. So we have the recipes. Now, recipes list view dot item source. We set this to this recipes object. Now let's implement add, update, and delete functions. So for the add, first I'm going to create a new recipe, set the name, recipe. We can use datetime.now.ticks as a way to differentiate recipe names. Now to add this object to the database, again we use connection.insert async. We also have insert all to add a list of objects, and insert or replace. In this case, I'm going to use insert async. So we had the recipe here, and it's an async method, so we need to await it and apply async modifier here. Now this will only add the recipe to the database, but it will not appear in our list view. So to add this to our list view, first we need an observable collection. So I'm going to declare a private field here, observable collection of type recipe, and call this recipes. Let's resolve the namespace. Okay, in onAppearing method, once we get the recipes from the database, we initialize this observable collection, new observable collection, and pass recipes here. And finally use this observable collection as the item source of our list view, like this. Now in onAdd method, here we can call underline recipes.add recipe. Let's run the application. All right, I'm going to add a couple of objects. Beautiful. Now, if I quit this application and launch it again, look, all recipes are there. So they're successfully persisted. Now let's implement update and delete. I'm going to start with delete first. So here I want to delete the first recipe in the list. Underline recipes, this is our observable collection. So we get the first recipe. Now to delete it from the database, again, we start with connection and call delete async. Pass the recipe, await the result, and make the method async. We should also remove this from our observable collection, so it will disappear from the list view. Underline recipes.remove recipe. Let's test the application. So delete, delete, beautiful. And finally, update. Again, I want to get the first recipe in the list and update its name like this. Now to persist the changes in the database, again, connection, update async. We also have update all async, where we can pass a list of objects. So here we add the recipe, await the result, and make the method async. Now let's run the application and see what happens. So I tap update. Nothing happens on the user interface, but I can guarantee that the object in the database is updated. Let's quit this application and launch it again. Look, the recipe is updated. So how come we didn't see the changes on the user interface? Well, that's the topic for the next lecture.